G'day guys, Storyhawk back here with another video. Thanks for stopping by. Karen is confused for getting the police called on her because she broke into my house after I went on holiday. Backstory. This happened in 2015 and still makes me wonder how dumb people are. I was on holiday with my mum and dad in Spain for a week. To make sure our house stayed well maintained, we would give 2 to 3 copies of our house key to our neighbours and told them to make sure nothing is taken. One of them was Karen, who was the only person in her family who was entitled. The story. So my family was back from our holiday, and by the time we got back we were so tired we left the luggage in the hall and went straight to our rooms to sleep. It was about 3 hours later when we heard something like glass break in our living room. If you've read my other stories then you would know I play airsoft, so I had a pistol with me. I took it with me loaded with BBs, airsoft bullets or pellets, and went downstairs with my dad who was looking for his airsoft rifle, but it wasn't in his case, so he followed me down with me. I walked into the room and I see Karen trying to rip the TV off the wall. In the process, she knocked over a glass which made a loud crack that went through the house. The conversation went like this. Me. What the F do you think you're doing? Karen. Borrowing your TV, what does it look like? Dad. You are trespassing. Get off my property now. Karen. You gave me a key, so I have a right to take all your stuff, as having a key means I own this house, so go away. At this point, Karen notices the gun and goes white. I take advantage and say go over to the kitchen. Next to my kitchen is a small bathroom, so as soon as she's near it, my dad pushes her in and locks the door. Afterwards, he calls the police. About 20 minutes later, they arrived, and when Karen heard them, she started screaming through the bathroom door saying that we kidnapped her and how we refused to let her go. I tell the police what happened and offered to show them camera footage as we have cameras all around the house. They took the footage and took Karen into custody until they looked over the footage. To sum this all up, Karen was stealing from us the whole week with stuff like radios and phones. We pressed charges and she gets 18 months in jail for robberies and trespassing. Entitled aunt tried to barge into my room while I was changing with my clothes and got her head banged against the door. My crazy entitled aunt, whom you all know so well by now, had an annoying habit, one of her many annoying habits, to just storm in while I was changing my clothes. The door would be closed, and if it wasn't locked she would just let herself in. My protests that I may be in a state of undress fell on deaf ears, as did any insistence that she knocked before entrance, like a civilized human being. The following incidents happened when I was either 18 or 19. Aunt and her husband were over for a visit. I was in my room, changing my clothes. My bedroom door had a small defect. It wouldn't lock properly, so anytime it was closed, my dad, stepmum and stepbrother would either knock or ask if they could come in. Not entitled aunt, of course. She considered herself above such frivolous courtesies. She could come into rooms as and when she saw fit, and mere mortals would just have to live with it. Unfortunately for her, this mere mortal had had enough of her privacy being invaded. My top was off when I heard the door begin to creak open. I yelled, "I'm changing, wait outside." As expected, Aunt didn't listen and was about to stick her head in when I swiftly reached the door, pulled it back a little and slammed it hard into Aunt's thick skull. Not enough to crack her skull, but enough to hurt. Aunt let out a howl that instantly brought a smile to my face. She went downstairs whining. I followed. She yelled at my dad about what I had done. My dad and uncle, Aunt's husband, were drinking at the time and were uncharacteristically chilled. Dad just looked at her, then looked at me and said something like, "Yeah, don't do that." My uncle just burst out laughing, as if his wife getting her head banged was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Such dismissal of her grievances was too much to bear for my aunt. She demanded that they leave immediately. Uncle told her he was in no condition to drive. Besides, he and my dad were going to watch a cricket match, so leaving was out of the question. Aunt dialed my cousin's number, believing wholeheartedly that her son would come to her aid. But judging from her end of the conversation, cousin was out with his friends and wasn't going to drive all the way over to deal with her stupid butt, and why couldn't she just stop getting into unnecessary squabbles? Aunt had no options left. She just sat down on the couch while holding against her head the ice pack my stepmom had brought for her. Her anger was boiling over but was completely ignored by my happy dad and uncle. It was a lovely evening. Single mum at Costco. So as you all know, people are freaking out about the coronavirus, so they're doing everything they can to get their hands on supplies to last the quarantine. My family decided that we were going to try to go to Costco today to get preparations for a couple of weeks of dinners and some other home essentials, like others are doing. As we're walking around and picking up the supplies we need, I started to notice that the store was basically in chaos. People were hoarding items such as toilet paper, although Costco has limited the amount of rolls a single person can buy at a time. There were a few people bickering back and forth about items, etc. It was kind of funny to see people acting so immature in a time of panic. My family and I took our groceries to the checkout line, as you do, and stood behind some woman and her 2 children. My dad and I started chuckling together about how much of a madhouse the grocery store was when the woman standing in front of us whipped around and started shouting at us to keep our germs to ourselves. She had a stick up her butt about us being too close to her and her 2 children, and how we were spreading our germs. It was a bit strange, but understandable, I suppose. When the woman in front of us finally got to the checkout counter, she started unpacking a good 10 to 15 packs of toilet paper as well as her other food groceries to be scanned. As I mentioned earlier, Costco has put a limit of 1 pack of toilet paper per person, which meant that this woman would have to put all but 1 pack back where she found them. The cashier mentions this fact to the woman and she replies by saying, "Well, I'm a single mum and I need these toilet paper rolls for my family, so we don't have to come back out and get sick once the virus spreads more." To which the cashier replied, "I'm sorry ma'am, but being a single mum doesn't have any impact on the limit. So I'm going to have to ask you to please put the excess toilet paper packs back." This woman was not having it. She had the audacity to start yelling at the cashier about how she should be respecting her because she works her butt off to maintain the peace of her family because her cheating, lying husband took all of her money when they divorced. And while this is all going on, the line was getting very long and people were getting impatient. So the cashier calmly tells her to either pay and take her groceries, not including the toilet paper, or to get out of line. The woman reluctantly agrees and proceeds to hand the cashier her card. Before the cashier can complete the transaction, the woman asks the cashier if she can have a discount because she's a single mum and can't afford everything she put in her card. Now, I've been standing in line for a good 20 minutes now, and this really got on my nerves. I don't understand why people are so uncooperative, especially about things like this. And to those in the comments, no, she did not get a discount. Entitled mother allows her precious baby to steal our cat. My family and I moved back to my home country, New Zealand, a few years ago and brought over all our animals. One of our cats became an outdoor cat and wandered to all the neighbours' gardens, but she would always come back home at night. One night, we noticed that she didn't come back, but we thought it was a fluke. One night became 1 week, and by then we had already called around our close neighbours and had printed our posters. One day, walking home from school, my sister saw her in the neighbour's window and called our parents. My mother and I went to their home and confronted them about it. Our neighbours consisted of 1 mother, 1 father, and a little girl, about 7 years old. Apparently what had happened was she wandered into their garden. The neighbour's daughter managed to catch her and wanted to keep her despite the obvious collar. The parents allowed her to keep our cat and replaced her collar. When my mother demanded that they give her back, our neighbour obviously refused and tried to twist the story to make it our fault because we didn't offer to sell our cat when we moved in. I don't even know how a person can be that delusional. The mother claimed that it was unfair to her previous baby that we didn't offer to give them our cat because her daughter was younger than my sister and I. She said that our cat and her child had formed a bond, blessed by God. I'd had enough and called our cat, and the second she appeared I grabbed her and ran away. The mother and child started to scream like banshees, so my mother followed after me. When the neighbour called the police and demanded that we give her back, they forgot the fact that microchips exist, and that was all the proof the police needed to see that she was ours. We did tell our neighbours who have cats to make sure to watch out for them. Entitled mother leaves child on my doorstep. I work in a preschool and sometimes babysit kids from work, especially when we are on break. Because of the virus, we are cancelled. Because my sister has a disability and is immunocompromised, my whole family agreed to go into self-isolation. Thankfully, most of us can work from home. We would limit our contact with all others, even our other family members, to protect my sister. I was playing outside in the driveway with my brothers when a familiar car pulls up, and one of the little girls, let's call her Susie, from the preschool gets out of the car. I've babysat her many times before, but never agreed to on this occasion. I assumed the mum was going to ask me to watch her, but when I approach the car she speeds off, leaving poor Susie there. I had not made any previous arrangements to watch her, and didn't want to let her into my house, knowing her father is a frequent flyer and Susie may be a carrier. I got her some water and let her sit down in the garage to get her out of the wind as I tried calling her mum and dad. Neither picked up at first, until I finally got a hold of a very angry mum. I explained I couldn't watch Susie and she would have to come back and pick her up. The mum freaked out, saying she was already at work. This is a total lie. She works at a mall, that I know for a fact is closed because of the virus. I tell her that if she doesn't return within half an hour, how far the mall is from my house, I would be calling CPS. She knows we are mandatory reporters because we already had to open a case on her. She explains that she can't, but says she will send her husband. 15 minutes pass, and then 30. I get Susie some chalk to colour while maintaining a distance, but trying to keep her happy. An hour later, I know no one is coming to get her. I phone CPS and the non-emergency police line, and police arrive at my house in a couple of minutes. I explain to them the whole situation, and thankfully a Child Protective Services worker is able to get there pretty quickly. The mum phones me later and yells at me for Susie being taken by CPS and them having another investigation, saying I always watch Susie during break. I explained my immunocompromised sister, and she's very offended. I even suggested Susie might be sick. I didn't even bother to explain how she could be a carrier without showing symptoms. Entitled mother claims she won't be returning Susie to our preschool because of my appalling and disrespectful behaviour, but I know that she has been kicked out of all the other preschools. I wouldn't mind if entitled mother never came back, but I would certainly feel bad for little Susie. Entitled parents let their kids play in our cactus garden. Note, this was pre-virus. My parents have a house in the city, and I am home with them due to the pandemic. My house has a very small plot of dirt in front that is fenced in by a large black iron fence. It's very clear this is private property. My grandmother has a very green thumb and brought some of her outdoor cactus. She lives in Connecticut, over to plant in the yard many years ago. They survive every winter and bloom in the summer, and are pretty cool plants. However, their spines and needles are very small and translucent. It is extremely hard to see them, and you can get pricked very easily. I myself have gotten pricked when tidying up the yard, and I obviously try to avoid the plants. The needles are also extremely hard to remove out of your skin. My mum used to always decorate the garden by placing little models of dinosaurs or animals along the cactus. The kids around the neighbourhood all loved it, and often when coming home I would see some family with a young kid looking at the garden. It was cute, and my family had no issues. Until these entitled parents come along. My mum was in the house on a normal day when she heard some loud noises outside that weren't going away. So she looks outside and sees a group of parents with their kids. The parents are standing outside and around the iron fence, while the kids are in the yard, which is almost completely covered in cactus. They are playing with the toy dinosaurs and animals while sitting in the cactus. It's clear the parents assumed the cactus didn't have any needles because they aren't really visible to the human eye. You can barely see the needles when they're in your skin. As my mum is looking at them, the parents see her and get their kids out of the yard and leave. Those parents are not going to have fun pulling hundreds and hundreds of translucent, tiny, thin needles from their children's arms, legs and butts. Thank you so much for tuning in again, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.